The first scene of the film opens with Jake Hoyt waking up on the first day of his new job as an undercover drug officer in one of the roughest areas of Los Angeles. Alonzo Harris, the leader of his group, oversees the work of 4 other men. Alonzo will take Jake for a ride today so that he may show him the neighborhood and observe how the young man does under pressure. Jake first meets Alonzo at a modest coffee shop, where Jake rapidly learns that Alonzo is a maverick, tough-talking drug enforcement officer. For the following few hours, we travel from the ghetto to the barrio, passing by rapists and drug dealers. Due to Alonzo's seeming familiarity with every terrible guy in existence, we learn a lot about him. He even shares a home in the slums with a girl and her son. Behind his back, everyone in that particular neighborhood despises Alonzo's abuse of power. Jake will also receive an expedited promotion within the division, according to Alonzo. While driving past an alleyway, Jake sees a young girl about to be raped and yells at Alonzo to stop the car. He doesn't want to stop because that's not what he's there for. Jake jumps out of the car and rescues the girl, but not before getting into a huge fight with the 2 men. Jake kicks their asses, and as he consoles the girl, Alonzo shows up and tortures the 2 men briefly before sending them on their way. The girl hurriedly leaves, and Jake finds her wallet on the ground and absently pockets it. Alonzo brings Jake to the home of Roger, a former LAPD officer who now works as a side drug dealer. Roger is an old buddy of Alonzo's. They had a drink together and some lighthearted banter. Alonzo dismisses the question and says it's not a problem when Roger inquires about an event that occurred when Alonzo was recently on vacation in Las Vegas. Everywhere they go, Alonzo gets away with more money or drugs by shaking down or just scaring the hell out of the bad guys. At one point, Alonzo forces Jake to smoke PCP-laced marijuana, holding a pistol to his head and telling him that if Jake had been with a drug dealer and refused, he'd be shot. It's obvious that Jake doesn't agree with what's going on, but Alonzo explains to him that to protect the sheep, you need to kill the wolves, and the only way to do that is to become a wolf. Jake smokes the weed and spends a few miles in a PCP-induced stupor. They meet with some prominent judges in Los Angeles over lunch. But all we really learn about them is that they aren't exactly the most law-abiding officials. They also inquire about Jake's experiences in Las Vegas, and Alonzo responds similarly to Roger in that he appears disinterested. He requests a search warrant from the courts, which they approve. Alonzo and Jake meet up with the other 4 members of the unit and, armed with the warrant, they storm into a small house. The house turns out to be Roger's, who has $4 million stashed away in the floorboards. Alonzo and his guys plan to divide up $3 million of the stash among themselves. Jake is very unsure of how the deal will go down. Back in Roger's living room, while they discuss their plan, Alonzo tells Jake to shoot Roger. Jake refuses, and Alonzo does the deed himself, saying, "It's not what you know, but what you can prove." To make the shooting appear to be self-defense, Jeff will be shot with one of Roger's weapons while wearing a Kevlar vest. Jeff asks Alonzo to call an ambulance after being shot. One of the bullets pierces his vest. As Alonzo and his gang approach, Jake snatches the shotgun out of nowhere and warns them that he won't play along. When Alonzo warns Jake that a blood or urine test will reveal that Jake has used drugs, Jake relents. When Jake backs off, the paramedics show up and the crime appears to go unsolved. Back at Alonzo's car, Jake tells him that what just occurred was murder. Alonzo counters, saying that Roger dealt drugs to kids in his neighborhood, and that since the money was dirty, it was theirs to keep. Alonzo seems to concede on one point, that Jake is still a rookie and needs time to accept Alonzo's dirty dealings. Alonzo informs him he must deliver some products to the household of one of his informants before they leave for the barrio. While Alonzo uses the restroom, Jake waits in the kitchen where a game of cards is being played. When Alonzo left a parcel, the home's owner, Smiley, opened it and had his sister count out the money. A brief talk regarding Jake's sidearm occurs as Smiley and his buddies sit down to play cards. This is a plot by Smiley's friend Moreno to remove Jake's weapon from him. Smiley then reveals that Alonzo left him behind and explains what happened in Las Vegas. Allegedly, a Russian gangster had been mouthing off to Alonzo until Alonzo lost his temper and beat the man to death. The gangster's bosses gave Alonzo an out. Play them $1 million and they'd forget the incident. If Alonzo can't pay by midnight, he'll be hunted down and killed. Knowing that he's been set up by Alonzo, Jake desperately tries to fight his way out, but Smiley and his guys take him down. They drag him into the bathroom, and just as they're about to shoot him in the head, one of them decides to take his wallet first. Out of his pocket comes the pink wallet he recovered from the rape scene earlier that day. Smiley furiously asks Jake how he got the wallet. Jake tells him that he'd stopped his cousin Letty from being assaulted and raped earlier. Smiley calls Letty and she confirms Jake's story. Smiley decides to let Jake go as a solid for rescuing his cousin. Jake boards a bus and travels to Alonzo's neighborhood in South Central's worst section, where he confronts him as he is preparing to hand the Russians his $1 million. For the next 10 minutes or so, there is gunfire in the home, on the roof, and throughout the neighborhood's streets. Finally, Jake makes Alonzo wreck his car, briefly putting him out of it. Jake drags him from the car and holds him at gunpoint. When he recovers, he and Jake face each other in the street with all the gang members surrounding them. Alonzo offers to make whomever shoots Jake a very rich man, but the gang members, tired of Alonzo's ego and control of them, refuse. Jake walks off with the money, leaving a shouting Alonzo to whatever fate awaits him. Alonzo gets into his car and drives towards the airport. His car is forced to a stop by several vans and outjump the armed Russians who kill him in a hail of gunfire. When Jake arrives home, we hear newscasts describing the killing of a highly decorated narcotics officer who was gunned down while investigating drug trafficking at the airport.